when you think of like messaging to an audience, it's not just like this fancy email with like a landing page and all that stuff. Sometimes it's just like you've got to just say the right thing for that medium.
Right.
And a lot of marketers struggle here because they'll kind of hide behind, oh, I'm not a writer and it's BS. Or the truth is they just don't really know.
Wing It Podcast, episode 96. Who do we have?
Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani. All right, another Unhinged.
We are back.
We're back. Unhinged. So we're doing a lot of Unhinged these days, and the topic of today, we're just going for probably the whole podcast equivalent, talking about it already, is content. Content production, content strategy, differences between a big company, small company, video, written, all this kind of stuff. And really kind of where we're going is that more and more we're seeing this, this need for quality content in all forms, right? And that it's succinct and it's part of a bigger picture strategy that the company has to drive their brand messaging. But certainly from a social media and I think of companies like LinkedIn because we're doing a lot of B2B. There's a volume of content that's needed to really engage the audience, and then there's also a quality of content that's needed to really engage the audience. So it's going beyond just, hey, we're sending out a couple of emails, or hey, we've got some posts, or we're putting together some, the odd explainer video. It's like, how can Goose Digital as an agency start to develop more of an entire content program for customers? Where, and this is kind of where we were thinking, is that, traditionally we've been doing marketing ops and, I guess even the CRM, a lot of paid media management, a lot of what we might call like the activation or distribution and management of the content through the system, right? And a lot of times the system's not set up properly, so we come in and we do all that. Now we're kind of seeing this, and we've always had the content side of the house has been smaller than the tech side of the house, if you want to call it that, or the activation side of the house. But we're doing more and more content now, video through some partners, written content, lots of social media, and some of our clients have their content in house, and they're happy to do that, and they don't need an agency. Other clients really require that. And I think for really our wheelhouse client in many ways is somebody that could take both of these services. They just don't have all the elements, have a big marketing team. So we're trying to figure out as we move forward, it's like, how do you get somebody into a program where you're going to rely on a Goose Digital to develop your strategic content and a lot of it throughout the whole year. And ultimately be in a place where that content delivers value in the form of helping the customer drive in audience engagement. Hey, now I know about that said customer through all these channels, and I'd like to talk to that customer.
Well, I think, okay, so there's so much here we can talk about. I'll try to cover it all. Like first and foremost, this isn't anything new. It never has been, and it never will ever be new as far as content is still king. And I don't know where marketing is going in the next 15 years, but content will play a critical role there, of course, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if it's B2B or B2C, it will always be what you say and who you say it to. And then as far as sort of the evolution of our agency's services, I think it's entirely logical. We've always said like it's about your MarTech stack and the operational ability to use that to go and deliver marketing to your audience or audiences. And what we're seeing more and more is you're going to be using a lot of that tech in order to do that, whether it's distribution because we only want to target a certain segment of our list. We want to really create content that's different for our customers than for organizations that haven't worked with us. So that kind of makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the final top line comment I would make is there's a lot of help that's required in delivering content. And it's about coming up with content that resonates with an audience. What's the purpose of it? And there's got to be a quality as well as a different kind of medium. But I also think there's a level of weight that needs to be factored into content as well. And it's different than quality because you still need something good, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as heavy. And like, for example, maybe we don't have to write a 12-page white paper anymore. Maybe it's a 2-paragraph email, and it's about getting it out to the right people. We'll use some of our tools and some of our intelligence around it, but it's about that distribution and the creation of the content in a meaningful way, if it's written, if it's video, if it's whatever. So I think the weight or like the brevity of the actual content matters as well.
I think that when I think of that, I think of strategy. When you think, well, could we say all that we might have said in a 3-page case study in a, couple of sentences on a testimonial kind of thing,
Sure.
and still achieve sort of what we're trying to achieve in terms of getting a level of credibility out in front of our customer base.
We've talked about that in previous podcasts too, right? Where like the 4-page case study is kind of going away.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a need for it, but it's a big ask for a prospect to read that much, and they probably won't, right? So what's the key takeaways you can deliver in a much more concise fashion?
Yeah, and I think what is challenging for teams is probably two levels. One is that strategy that you're talking about. Hey, we don't have to write the email doesn't have to be that long. The social posts that we're trying to get forward here is really should be in this vein, not that vein. So that's strategy around content alignment of messaging and creative and all that kind of stuff back to the goal. That's super hard, I think, for a lot of these teams. And part of it, I think, even though you've said, content's always king and it always will be, I think it's that rise of MarTech and marketing ops over the last, 8 to 10 plus years where the people just moved, they kind of got lost in the tech, right?
Absolutely.
So they're more skilled at sort of like the tooling than they are really understanding. Well, I can put up a social post. Yeah, you technically can put up a social post, but it makes no sense, or it's not like you said. It doesn't have to carry the same weight or the same alignment that it should have.
I totally agree. There's no question that MarTech kind of stole a lot of the focus over the last decade, as far as like the emphasis went on understanding the tools, maybe to a fault, going so deep down nurture streams or whatever else, and less focus went into the quality of content and communication.
100%.
And I think now that a lot of those barriers have been canceled out, because that's just table stakes now, that you would have a decent to very good MarTech stack and people that can use these tools effectively, be it internally or you've got an agency supporting. Since that's now table stakes, what we're reverting back to is quality of message, which as a marketer, and I think even like a lot of our listeners, whether they're marketers, they're buyers themselves, it's like, finally, now we can have like good messaging again that actually makes sense. And it's not just, look at this really sick marketing program I whipped up inside of Marketo.
I think the tech stack and then AI is going to accelerate this as well, is that it's just allowing you to spin up more. It's to do the distribution efficiently. So it's allowing you to get, propagate a poor message faster, right? So now I've got a sequence of 5 drip email that technically set up really well, but inside it doesn't hit the mark. So I'm just spreading a poor message, 10 times faster than I used to be able to do that, right?
Totally. And when I go through LinkedIn and I read these great marketing use cases or marketing successes, that the number one thing that sticks out to me now is, well, kind of two things they go hand in hand, is the messaging is really strong, and it's the simplicity of the delivery.
Right.
It's not a complex email nurture program. It's not this thing where it's like no one can launch this. What it really is a simple message delivered really well, and you're just like, oh, that's just really good.
Right.
Anyone can facilitate the distribution of it, because again, it's all table stakes and it's easy. But it's like we're getting back down to basics, and the basics is just get the message right for your audience, and maybe with a bit of creativity.
Yeah. So, and then I think the second thing that is challenging, so the messaging and the alignment to strategy and, that whole thing that you talked about was one challenge. The second challenge, I think, is mapping out. It's not the plumbing, it's not the activation layer that you're saying is easy for somebody to get right. Like, oh, we know how to do a drip series. We've got the tooling to do it. We can post it to social media. We can check this, check that, do all these things. It's more, what's the right program? What's the amount of things and the sort of quantity and and the cadence of all of that stuff, right? So if you said, hey, for somebody your size and the type of goals that you have and where you're at in your journey, you should be doing X number of these things, X number of times a week of this exact thing. So here's actually the program that we would put you in that box, right? Then we've got content strategy alignment to fill those items out in the best possible way. So I think a lot of teams struggle and they pull back because they'll say, well, let's just get one video right. Let's just get, so let's pull back on all this volume or all this cadence. And I'm not even saying they're getting that right because they're so freaked out of the message isn't dialed in that they'll say, well, let's just get one really good video. And what I'm saying is that's not good enough. What's good enough, what your table stakes today are the messaging alignment, like you said, but then enough of a volume and cadence where it actually is competitive, right? So the business looks at it and says, yeah, well, we're getting X number of things a day or a week. I can see that coming out in terms of email form, social form, website integration. Everything's moving at a certain cadence. So, we have a bit of that mapping down, but I think when we look at evolving our content services, that's really where I think that content strategy to content activation strategy come to life. And then you have different sizes for different companies depending on how big they want to go.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree.
So, when I look at it for some of the clients that maybe you're working with, maybe we could talk a little bit about the differences between like a small company. When I say small, like maybe they don't have more than a couple people in marketing kind of thing compared to some of the bigger accounts that you might be working with that have an huge established marketing team, and even them they're leveraging us. But what are the types of content things that we're getting involved in with the bigger guys?
Sure. Where do you want to start? At the smaller companies?
No, go with the bigger guys.
So the bigger guys, I find it's sort of the same in both big and small, but there's nuances with each. With the larger organizations, I find my primary role is I'm like the chief mobilizing officer, where it's just about having the vision for how each of the pieces of content or the assets can be created, like just the know-how. This is how we'll create a 2-minute video.
Right.
These are the elements of it. And they're, okay, step me through, okay. Mm-hmm. And then here's how we're going to use it in the context of a campaign. And we need to make sure that it's consistent with the other assets that we're using, whether it's written emails, whether it's landing pages and things like that.
Right.
And I think, so the mobilization is one, getting everyone together and on the same page. And I think that's the role of like an outside consultant or agency, is we can do that. And they kind of feel more like committed to the agency than if someone internally said, we want to do this.
Sure.
It's funny how that works, but that's certainly the role, and we can all use it to our advantage. And then just kind of making sure everyone's on sort of the same page there. And my role then kind of shifts into like the continuity manager, and making sure this actually all does make sense in the context of, because in larger orgs, you've got the product person who's like, okay, I'll create the script for the video. But he or she isn't thinking about the landing page, which is someone else's responsibility. So,
right.
So someone's got to be over top of it all, saying, okay, these do work together. There's some difference in the content in each, but like it overall speaks to the same message.
Right.
That's typically the challenges you see in a larger organization, like a larger marketing organization specifically. And I think that speaks to some of the challenge of why they haven't done it themselves in some cases.
Yeah. It also sort of feels like, that chief mobilization or even the continuity officer, it's, they're not necessarily buying the end result from us, right? Like we're working with them with strategy services and other components of their program. So they're leaning on us. But if they were buying that end result from an organization, if they were literally going to a Goose Digital or another agency and saying, hey, we want to buy this entire campaign from you or this entire concept from you, well, now that agency is going to be putting all these pieces together. They're like, certainly they better be thinking about all the elements of the campaign, because otherwise it's going to be super disjointed and not work, right? So I almost wonder, like, you get a bit of this, like, well, who's responsible for that inside of the company? Like, I'm the writer, I'm the graphics designer, I'm the, the automation specialist, like, but who typically I'd be the marketing oversight, but that's still very challenging to knit all those components together. I mean, we've seen it with some of our clients where, they'll say one thing, you look at the website and it's completely different.
Oh,
They'll
yeah.
talk about the services that they offer and they'll be like, but your website, like, you literally just published your website last year and it doesn't say that. Like, it's different. The way you're describing that service and that product that you offer is not the same. Oh yeah, it's, so and so, they're supposed to update the website, and it's like, yikes, that's a huge miss. So I think there's so much in the realm of content, even in that layer, like going to an organization from a third party lens and saying, I listened to your sales team, I listened to your business leaders, I've looked at your website, and like those things are not lining up. I don't know what you call that, what service you call that, but
Truth teller.
you know,
I think the role of websites has really changed, and I think the expectations of a website in telling that story concisely has changed too. We've moved from huge websites to like now they're really like sort of light, and they're not trying to tell the whole story.
I've seen that more and more. Even like there's big companies that we follow, like agencies, all kinds of companies, software companies, and like they've gone to almost like these one page websites.
Yeah,
And you just like hop down sections, and I'm like, this is a 2,000 person, media company or tech company, and they have basically a single page website. Like, what's going on here?
yeah. I understand it. Like I do think what your website says should represent the company, the vision, what you do, ultimately like the kinds of clients who work with you and the use cases, but it can't speak to everything, particularly in these really, really technical businesses, right, and their offerings. And then it's like that field marketing or the product marketing. That's going to be where more detail is at, and it could be pointing towards deeper assets. It could be like landing pages or microsites that really speak to this. Like, imagine you're like the CMO of a really large, Salesforce or like Microsoft, and you have all these lines of businesses. How do you create a website that speaks properly to each? And I always kind of come back in my head to, well, maybe you don't. And the field marketing specifically for one of the clouds is going to be really deep in knowledge, and it's going to point somewhere else entirely.
Right.
And that's how you really tell that story on a product marketing focus or like a line of business kind of
Right,
thing.
right. Yeah, I think it also speaks to going back to what we were saying before around content strategy. If the way people are hearing about you is through, an integrated kind of content strategy with video and type messaging around the product and service and challenges, then they're already aware of who you are, and they're probably gaining a lot of that context of what you can do for them through that piece of content that you've given them, right? So then they come to your website, and as long as they're an agency or they're whatever, great, I'll reach out, because I those two pieces work together. I think if you've got a small site and you really lack sort of any kind of content strategy, you're probably at more risk, because A, your discoverability is going to be much lower with a smaller site, and B, they've got no context of really knowing, about you. But I think it's interesting, and I wonder if that's just that for some companies, certainly, like, I know what you're saying, these big ones, but
But what I wonder on your example is, I think some of it comes down to like the notoriety of your organization inside of your your industry.
for sure.
So
Yeah.
if you're a large organization and for whatever reason, like you're not too well known in your space, so then you say as the marketer, well, as part of you're using the term activation, but as part of our distribution of message, we have to meet our visitors where they play. And today they're not coming to our site because they don't really know who we are.
Right.
We are not a destination of them. So where are they? They're probably on LinkedIn. Maybe it's communities, depending on like the industry and the job function, right? Like marketers and salespeople are oversharers, so they have a million communities. Some other functions and roles might not be that case. They're definitely on email. They're definitely on these other areas. So maybe it's more like our website doesn't have to be this huge encyclopedia of offering. It can represent well what we do at a high level, but we're going to go meet them where they are.
I also think it's, yeah, for sure. And I think it we've said this before, that, your website can help you and it can hinder you. If you've got if you're allowing somebody to self-qualify and you've got the wrong information on there, if you're trying to describe a product or service and you've gone sort of into a level of detail that you think is helping, and then all of a sudden you realize, well, actually, that like we think it makes sense, but then the person reading it, or the vast majority of people going there, it's like, I don't think they do everything that I need. So
I think less is more, though.
and
You're
less
right.
could be way more in that sense. It's like, hey, we happen to do, a certain line of business, and it's a very small not small mention, but it's a panel on our homepage, a couple bullet points. Oh, well, I guess they do that service. They're not getting into tons of detail on how or what or exactly what's in there, but that's okay. I'll ask, right? Or it's there. I go and I
Yeah.
create a page that has a bunch of detail and I miss something. So I can see where that makes a lot of sense for companies that cannot maintain a level of content.
And it's that old adage, like I'm reminded of, as far as sales goes, where it's the more you talk, the less likely it is that you're going to win the deal.
Mm-hmm. No, it's good.
So I think that that's an interesting part too when you think about what that looks like. Like I'll never forget. This is like 15 plus years ago. I was fortunate enough to come across a direct competitor's first call deck. And I was like, okay, well, they're super respected. They're an industry leader. I was like, this thing is going to be mind blowing.
Yeah.
This is going to have all of the aha moments I've been seeking as a sort of working at a challenger organization.
Yeah.
Just being like, how do we be as good as they are? And I remember seeing this deck. It was like 8 slides.
Yeah.
And I wrote back to the person who shared it, like, is this it?
Yeah.
He says, yeah, that's it. And that was the moment I was like, oh, there isn't some sort of like breakthrough slide that just mind blowing and just seals the deal.
Yeah.
It's kind of the less is more, and it really just kind of focused on here's our vision of industry, here's how we solve for it, here's some client examples, and that was kind of it. Really.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot there, and you're like, and at first you're like, where's the rest?
I think it goes to, I could really see a world where you need to have enough content for people to research, and like you said, enough notoriety or brand presence through a content strategy is really part of the equation here, because I think you can get away with a smaller website upheld by all the information that you're learning about through that content program. But I also think you need enough information for them to learn about your business. There has to be enough there that you're credible, right? And you can say, oh yeah, these guys actually do. I'm doing some research ahead of time, and so it's like, it's almost finding that, thinking about it from the lens of what's the minimum amount that somebody needs to know about you in your target, who you're trying to reach. So it's a super small business. Maybe you need pricing on the website or whatever the example could be. Put it on there. Make sure you have the bare minimum. But I could see more and more. Like I could see a site for us that was a single page website. There's a content area, maybe a pop-up form. And everywhere you went, if you wanted to learn more, all it does is take you to a link to like what would be our resource section with that area as a tag. Mm-hmm. Oh, you want to learn about paid media services? And it started just going into a collection of articles and stuff that we publish all the time, videos and things that we have. And it's like, yeah, we clearly do that. And, call us to learn more about those services, right? Instead of having like these pages that we've got on our website that, are dedicated to paid, that kind of more of an old school type of approach. It's really interesting when you put in that lens. And I think that it goes towards what we're talking about in just content strategy overall. Like, how do you go from a company that has a hard time even managing their own website, some of our clients, to, hey, we expect you to manage, 30 pieces of content a month and get it out there in a consistent manner, right?
And I think it can sound overwhelming, and that's not the intention. So I think a big part of the role we play, and this is transitioning from working with large organizations to small organizations. This is kind of one of the nuanced changes. Is like, they both sizes of org know that they're going to have to do a lot of content. I think most of them are even behind that. The big company will think, okay, we do have people and resources. We can kind of split it up, but it's not so heavy an ask on one person. Mm-hmm. The small company, though, will look at it and say, oh, 1 or 2 people have to own all of this, maybe even one person. Mm-hmm. And so then it becomes a little paralyzing, and just the sheer amount of overwhelmingness, right? And so an agency, you or I as a consultant can come in and say, you're going to need 30 pieces of content. Before you freak out and say, how are we going to deliver all that? Some of it's really short. Some of it's going to be this and that. We can support the creation of a lot of it. But the biggest thing, even outside of the extra hands and resource, is just a viable plan for what is going to happen here.
Yeah.
What is the role it's going to serve? How are we going to deliver it? All these things that are probably in the back of his or her head saying, oh, okay, I'm not really sure what we would do here. I can kind of get behind the idea. And I think that's our role there, right? So you're the chief coordinating officer or whatever you want to call it, but you're the one that has the answers for how this is all going to go. And hey, that 2-minute video, we want to have one of the salespeople kind of do just basically a high level elevator pitch. It's not a big deal. We'll film it, we'll brand it, we'll make it look nice. That's something that you're just a CC on an email of coordination on. You don't have to do anything. Okay, that's great here, and this is how it'll be distributed. And when we think about that sort of play or that activation as far as when we use it, it's going to be the third step because we need to introduce our brand first and all that stuff. And then I think once a plan comes in, they can get behind it. But it's that overwhelming piece at the beginning where it's like, well, I've already got a million other things going on. And
Yeah.
that's how.
And I think the continuity layer or the, not even mobilization, it's more the continuity and the strategy that the layer that the agency provides. It's so different than a lot of internals. And I think what happens with internals, companies scale, and if you're, let's say founder led, you get further and further away from really understanding that piece. And unless you've got a strong number two or somebody in there that can really bring up the people underneath, this is really what we stand for. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is what we've always been trying to achieve. This is very difficult. I mean, we've been through acquisitions and now all things are changing, vision's changing, and then it's like you've got everyone inside the organ. Okay, well, we can put out content, but like, is it really meeting the mark, right? So it's almost like that role is so valuable. That external strategist consultant role becomes so valuable because they're really getting in there and like trying to understand, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to do here? I see all the stuff you're doing. Maybe you guys have kind of veered off track over the last couple of years. I see what you're trying to achieve here. And I'm personally invested in stitching all of this together,
Right.
Helping you guys stitch all this together. I mean, you can see that. I mean, like we've got vendor partners that have turned over their marketing team 4 times in the last 5 or 6 years, right?
You know what it is? Like, I kind of had this like moment of clarity recently, and the role of an agency, the reason an agency or consultant is so crucial, it's the fresh pair of eyes. So you say, oh yeah, I know, but it's a bit more than that. What it really represents is a fresh pair of eyes and a new voice at the time of now. And whenever we get introduced to these organizations and we start working with them, we're solving for today right now. And those people at that organization, they have great leaders or had great leaders. That's not necessarily the problem. The problem was they're all built and structured with to-do lists as long as you can think of, and skill sets around solving the problem from 6 to 12 months ago.
Right.
And then things have changed. The business has changed. The industry has changed. All of these things, change happens so quickly. So now they're not equipped to deal with that. And their mindset is kind of, to no fault of their own, still stuck in solving for 6 or 12 months ago. And we come in and we're just pounding out ideas right away, solving the now. But they don't have the ability to do that. They're like committed to doing and following through on things that they've already said they would do.
Right.
They're halfway through last quarter's marketing campaign. It was this big thing, and it probably was a good idea, but now things have shifted and changed, and it's not going to sort of hit the same way.
Yeah.
So we come in and we're like laser focused on, well, what's the mission right now? Oh, it's to do more of this in this particular field and industry. Yeah, we can do that. Here's all these ideas, and right away they've got a dozen more ideas than they would have had even this time next month because they're still committed to the old thing.
Yeah.
And so that fresh pair of eyes is the solving the now, and I think that's really difficult to break internally, whereas we don't know anything about the old. We don't care and we don't know. So like now we're just like, how do we do this? And that's the biggest impact I think we make out of the gate.
Yeah, and I think, with the rise of these B2B social media networks that allow you to get engagement on your audience, right? I think my biggest concern is for these internals is that it's actually more work. So you talk about having a task list a mile long, and it's true. It's like, how do they actually get, we used to do 3 things, now we need to do 4 or 5. And it's like, and I need support myself. Like I need an agency I can lean on. We've got clients that are trying to do, more product data for their e-commerce website. And it's like, they can't get enough products on the site. They just do not have the bandwidth internally, right?
But as we think about content, I'm coming up with all these new titles, but like we're like the chief counseling officer too, where it's like, I know in the past you've had 1 or 2 things that you had to do and they were big.
Yeah, right.
And now we're saying you got to do 5 or 10.
Yeah.
And the first thing, like everyone says, I don't need more to do.
Sure.
But it's not more, it's different. And,
Yes.
and so that was the kind of the comment off the top of this podcast that I was saying to you is it's about the weight of it though. Mm-hmm. Because maybe we're saying you need like 3 more emails or 5 more videos, but they're not huge lifts. What they are is they're shorter, tighter, and more specific to this bigger message we're trying to tell.
Yep.
So I think you're right though, is like some of them are just like, they're really stuck in that. And our job is to kind of counsel, coordinate, and have answers around. It doesn't have to be this big, huge thing. We just need to continually have messages out to these audiences. We always were going to need that.
Yeah, for sure. And having said that, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of agencies because we've worked in collaborative setups with other agencies inside of clients where some agencies do not have that same strategic engagement, whatever we're calling all those little titles that you threw out, where they're like, well, we can help you add bandwidth to a creative function that you're trying to achieve, and maybe even a specialized function. Maybe it happens to be in an e-commerce environment or in a direct marketing environment or in video environment, whatever it happens to be. We have that capability. But what we don't have and what we lack is, that higher level strategic piece that can dig in and really help navigate those elements. They kind of sit there and be like, okay, cool, now what do you want to do?
So that first part of what you said, I think is true, but that's table stakes from a service provider. My assumption is, you're going to bring more people to the table, like a greater set of resources with a higher degree of bandwidth to get more done. I think it's the differentiator, the key is where you started to go there with you've got someone strategic who's got a vision for how all this is going to go.
And that's the question that I would be asking
100%.
When you're engaging agencies is like above and beyond the execution of whatever you're able to do, and you've cost optimized the ability to get videos out or audios out or whatever it happens to be. And we just went through this with a client with audio. It was a disaster, and they didn't bring strategic to the table. So it was like kind of like left the internal team to do it all. And it was like, oh yeah, thanks for nothing, so to speak. Like, you just kind of threw this on us, and now we're having to navigate. So yeah, it's huge value. And I definitely think that with any kind of content, outsourced content component or parts of that strategy layer becomes huge value for the client. And I know sometimes people don't want to pay for strategy because they feel like they should be able to do it themselves. But even if it's like part of the budget is better than none of the budget, right?
It's sort of like that. Yeah, there has to be a person at the agency that can hold the vision together and mobilize or rally a set of actions around having all of those things built, right? And sometimes it's not a lot of work. You're just the person with the answer, and you're kind of stick handling and coordinating a little, but that role is so crucial, even if like the perceived work isn't a lot, right?
Yeah. All right, I think that's pretty good for today. Got to cover some content.
We're at time. Yes.
We're at time. All right, well, good stuff. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
See you in the next one.